Okay, everybody, good morning. How are you all doing today? Great. Let's see. Today we're going to talk about the Constitution at the last part of class. I'm going to ask you guys to take out paper, a pencil, or a pen. If you have a computer, you can use that too. I'll ask that just after you're done with class, that you email me what you've written from that. We're going to do sort of an exercise, a primary source analysis on the Constitution, so stay tuned for that. Before we get there, I want to talk about how the Constitution came into being, and it has a lot to do with the forces that were at work as the new Meiji government took shape, and the movements that were happening also in the country beyond the capital. So if you'll recall, we talked about the Charter Oath as this very important moment when the thank you, Ms. Regas. The new government, aspiring government, laid forth their 5 most important promises to the people of Japan, what they hope to accomplish. And we talked about one of those particular last class, and the class before that. The bringing knowledge in from around the world. I want to talk today about the top one, the formation of the deliberative assemblies. The idea was not new. The idea of having an assembly where people could get together and discuss what would happen in Japan and who would be chosen by vote. Right? This is not new in Japan, but there was no such institution in place. The idea came about for the first time sort of among the people in Japan actually before the Restoration happened. If you recall, we talked about this figure before. Sakamoto Ryoma was a figure who was important in bringing together Choshu and Satsuma, if you recall, helping to form this Satsuma Choshu clique as a third sort of unifying force. One of the ideas that he had in trying to help either overthrow the shogunate or to reform it was to introduce a bicameral assembly, right, or a legislature, where the population could vote, and then the government would be decided upon by the people, right, and sort of a more democratic way of ruling, moving away from the top-down shogunate structure. He wrote this down in a proposal that sometimes I think your book calls the Tosa proposal. This is one way you can refer to this proposal, and it was not very complicated. He is drawing from ideas that have been written about in the West, hoping that Japan can apply these. This, as you can imagine, created some controversy. You can imagine that at this point, before the Restoration, the forces of the shogunate are worried about losing power. They're worried about the government taking away the power of the shogun, and they're really worried about what happens to the aristocracy if we allow a democracy. So he was assassinated by the Mawagi, a group of special police working in Kyoto for the shogunate. So this idea doesn't come to fruition in his lifetime, but it does sort of plant the seed for this. So I want to describe some different lines that lead eventually to the Constitution and to an imperial diet, a parliament. So while this lays the seed, and if you'll recall also, many of the important leaders of the new government, we'll see at the end of class today, are from Choshu, are from Satsuma, are from Tosa, and so they are inspired by this idea for a constitution that embodies, that includes a bicameral legislature as they created a new government. Speaking of some of these figures, I want to talk about a group that was influential in spreading the ideas of the West among the elite. Because part of what's happening is the government that will eventually create a constitution and a diet or a parliament is responding to a larger sort of intellectual fervor, like an foment, right? We're talking about a movement to try and bring more popular strength and a larger role for the population of Japan in the government. And part of this has to do with this group. This group I'm talking about is the Meiji Sixth Society, founded in Meiji Sixth, the sixth year of the Meiji period, by figures who were, they share some common traits. Several of them are from Satsuma or Choshu or Tosa. Several of them have studied overseas, right? So they are in France, in England, in Germany, in the United States. So they are the most well-informed Western experts in Japan. And third, they're interested in trying to apply their knowledge to Japan as a whole. They want to fix Japan, put Japan on a path towards a more modern, a stronger future using their Western knowledge. So this society, very elite thinkers, is important in our story of getting to the imperial diet. I want to mention first a figure, Mori Arinori, who was a middle-ranking samurai from Satsuma. He had gone to the shogun school. He was very smart, right? But he had ideas about trying to have a broader, more sort of outward-facing Japan. And so he goes to study abroad in London in '65. He's a member of the Iwakura Embassy, which we discussed last class. So I think he has a very high title. Maybe he's like the vice ambassador of the U.S. ship or something like that. So he's an important figure in the Iwakura Embassy. He's most interested in education, right? So he's taking notes about education in the West all along. And when he goes back to Japan, he is trying to think of all the important pieces of the Western civilization that he can bring to bear for Japan. He's a liberal thinker. He promotes very strongly the idea that religion should be a free right for everyone to practice as they please. He believes education is the most important piece, right, for a modern Japan, and so he will oversee that process. I'll mention that in a second. He's also so in favor of the West that he would even like to apply some linguistic changes. Well, I'll get to that as well in a second. He's also one of the first figures to talk about the rights of women in Japan as problematic. He again is he's talking about the American standards for women, which he sees as very high. I mean, obviously he's not seen the entirety of the situation. He's I think overlooking some important legal, economic, social disparities from in the U.S., but he does want to bring that to Japan. He would like to make sure that Japan is part of a global, Western-controlled global sort of system in which there is international law, which Japan will adhere to. He would like for the English language to become, if not the language, the second language of Japan. So he is also very heavily in favor of that as well. So he's sort of just super in favor of Westernization. And as we'll see over the next several weeks, right, Westernization is the most important trend in the Meiji period. That's what it is, what's driving a lot of these important changes that are happening. He becomes the first Minister of Education when he comes back from the Iwakura Embassy, and he's the architect of the Education Ordinance, which he mandates from overseas when he's still abroad. He oversees the creation of all of these prefectural schools, which are opened. The mandate for having compulsory education for 4 years. These are all his projects. But as part of this society, this sort of study group, he also writes quite a bit. And so I'll get to that also in a second. Another figure that I would like to talk about, a member of the Meiji Sixth Society, is Nakamura Keiyu, or Nakamura Masanao, who is another intellectual who traveled to Great Britain. In this case, he was part of the first Bakufu mission, where they were trying to, if you'll recall, revitalize, reform, and they began to look outwards. I discussed last class how that involved the trip to Great Britain and to France as well. He was on that first trip, and he stays for a couple of years, becomes immersed in Western culture, Western learning, Western languages. He also comes back and also has ideas about the place of Japanese women in society and wants to change that. So he, among other things, founds the first women's normal school, a school for becoming a teacher, thinking that this is a role that women could play in Japan. But again, this society's goal is to change society through writing about it in part, right? Through trying to spread new ideas, better ideas in their view, that will transform Japan. And his writings in particular focus on translating these key Western thinkers like John Stuart Mill, On Liberty, which you've probably heard of a little bit, right? Very famous book for American political thought. Also John Stuart Mill's book on the subjection of women. He also translates that. He also translates Samuel Smiles' Self-Help. Have you guys heard before of Samuel Smiles at all? Does that ring a bell a little bit? So give me like a one-sentence description of Cash of what Samuel Smiles is talking about in Self-Help. Any ideas? Yeah. So it's all about how an individual, the sort of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right, idea. This is the book that sort of sells that to the American public. It's very popular. And what it's also doing, in a sort of a little bit less obvious ways, it's trying to apply an idea called social Darwinism to individual, career paths, ambitions. This is an idea that is more written about by someone named Herbert Spencer, who was also translated by a person of the society, who I'm not going to talk about today. He might be in your book. But the main idea is that if Darwin can describe how animals evolve, right, and how only the most fit survive, humans are the same. And humans are also the same in societies. So societies evolve. There are those that are more evolved than others, right? Those that are more have progressed further on this sort of linear axis towards civilization. And so all these things are on the mind of the Japanese. And in this case, we're talking about individuals being part of societies, the ones who are the most ambitious, the most evolved, the most that work the hardest are the ones that succeed. So he translates that, and he writes about that as well. And so his ideas and those of the first education minister are, profusely clarified and expanded upon in the Meiji 6 publication. The last one I want to mention, probably the most important, in fact, in terms of intellectual contributions, is Fukuzawa Yukichi. He's part of this first mission to the West. He goes to the U.S. As an interpreter. He is a little bit different. He's a samurai, but he had studied in the Western, Dutch learning school in Nagasaki. So he had actually come through Dutch towards Western learning. And so he is going to become the most prolific and the most important, I think, Western expert in Japan. He writes lots and lots of books. He writes very well. People like to read what he has to write. So all those who read at a certain level, right, will know his name, will read his books. He writes books about the West and about the West, applying the West's knowledge and strategies to Japan. I've given you a few of his most important titles here. As the third title, I think, demonstrates, we're talking again about civilization, right? So what is civilization? How can humanity be more civilized? He also writes a book to help women be a bit freer and a bit, in his view, have a more agency, more proactive approach to life, and how society can help to foster that. So anyway, more important ideas coming through the Meiji 6 Society. The society puts out a journal called the Meiji 6 Journal, which is the leading intellectual journal of its day. So the former samurai class, who are the most educated class, are reading this journal with great interest. At the same time, this journal is part of a larger explosion and the birth of the mass media in the mass print media in Japan. The first newspapers get their starts in the 1870s. By 1880, they're already circulating in the millions, and they become affordable, right? So this is also a big change. And sometimes these papers will all include articles by major six authors and other authors who are trying to promote Westernization. So we see sort of that the intellectual class of Japan is beginning to influence more and more the ideas of the more and more educated middle class through these kinds of publications. Some of these figures are also the founders of Japan's first private universities. Fukuzawa Yukichi founded Keio University, which is sort of like the Yale of Japan. It's a smaller university, very elite university. And it's dedicated to free thinking, liberal thinking, right, progressive thinking, those kinds of ideals. And so for the samurai class looking to find a place in this new system, right, these universities are going to be sort of a gateway, right, to achievement, to success. Not all the students go through these gateways, but some do, right, and it allows them to have a degree and an education that will put them on sort of among the most educated and the most influential people, right, in the new government system. Sorry, I go to Keio to do my research a lot, so I decided to make the picture bigger for some reason. Another figure is we talked about Mori Arinori. He founds Japan's first business school, which becomes later on Hitotsubashi University. And this is another school that has the goal of trying to modernize Japan. In this case, he would like to sort of transmit the most important Western business knowledge to Japan to help the sort of the first class of entrepreneurs take off, right, in the 1880s, and he does that, I would say, pretty well. Another figure, not a member of the Meiji Six Society, is Okuma Shigenobu, who is part of the same Satsuma Choshu clique. I think he's from Satsuma, but it's been a while since I've Googled him. But he was a leader in lots of sort of important political movements of this time. But he also founds the other of the two major private universities in Japan, Waseda, in 1882. So larger and larger intellectual class, right? More and more unified sort of theories of knowledge, right? Western knowledge and Western learning being propagated among this intellectual class. So this class is moving towards, at least considering, a more liberal, more democratic government. But I also want to sort of highlight what's happening among the other classes, right? The commoner class. And this begins with a figure whose name is not there for some reason. It should say Itagaki Taisuke. He's in your book. You can look him up. And I'll add that to the slide after class. He is a former samurai, sort of with the middle rank of Tosa. He is taking the ideas of Sakamoto Ryoma and others, right, and trying to make them happen in a very quick way. So he creates the first actual political party, right, and this group is dedicated to having, to establishing in Japan a parliament of some sort. It's called the People's Rights Association, and when news gets out about this, right, the idea of having a group for people's rights, this is a brand new idea in Japan, and for people who are not super literate or super tied to the capital, this is a very, I think, very sort of revolutionary idea. And so he, in a sense, is only calling for a constitution which sort of limits but also promises the people of Japan powers and vice versa for the government. He also is calling for a parliament that is actually elected. He's worried about the dominance of these samurai Choshu samurai who have basically sort of replaced the shogunate with themselves, right? He's worried about that. He would like to see a more democratic government in place. And so from what he writes, his small, somewhat short-lived association we have the growth of an actual movement called the Jiyu Menken Undo, the Freedom and People's Rights Movement, which becomes sort of a groundswell, in fact, sort of a grassroots inspirational movement. Thousands of people all over Japan read about him in the papers that they're now getting, or they hear about him from a friend, and begin to form their own local political associations. And again, calling for the same kinds of things, like a constitution which prescribes the power of the government and lays out people's place, right, beneath that government, and also a parliament. This movement begins to spread, and it attracts also some samurai who are looking themselves to fix Japan. It attracts also some upper class, well-educated men, and also some women from the merchant class as well. This is Oi Kentaro, who was inspired and who worked with Itagaki Taisuke, the guy from the previous slide, to try and turn this movement into an actual national unified movement. He has some success, but you can imagine that farmers and commoners throughout Japan who are trying to have their own associations don't all have the same goals in the end, right? But they do have a few unifying goals, and Oi Kentaro tries to bring these goals together into a political party. He founds the Liberal Party, and this party will stay in place throughout the entire imperial period of Japan, right, until 1945. It is the party of democracy, the party of limiting government oppression, promoting people's rights, their civil rights and their liberties. And his new party is the dominant voice, even stronger, I would say, than the original founder of the smaller People's Rights Association of Itagaki, calling for local and national assemblies. I don't think we have a lot of time to go into this, but he also begins to dabble in terrorism and other ways to sort of push this agenda to happen more quickly. He, for that, goes to jail. But I think the most important part, I think, for our class is that he is influential. People, beyond his circle of friends, beyond his party itself, right, are hearing about him, reading about him, following what's happening to him, and they're interested in this movement. Another figure that you read about probably for today is Kishida Toshiko. So this is a woman from the samurai class, very well educated, and she would even actually become a teacher, like a tutor for the empress, I believe, at some point. So she's a well-educated woman who is again and again frustrated with the place of women in Japan. We haven't in this class done a lot with that, but this is one of the most glaring points of criticism for Westerners in Japan is how women are treated. And she joins Oi Kentaro and others, right, on a speaking circuit, and she gives speeches, right? And if you can imagine Japan in 1882 or so, 1883, not a lot of women are speaking in public at all, let alone giving large lectures, and she's doing that. So on an all-male ticket, she's the only woman, and she's talking about politics, which again is revolutionary. Her main argument is not about democracy as much as it's about sort of how democracy would apply to women, and so she's very vocal about that. She attacks a phrase taken from Confucianism, which basically says that we should hate women and revere men. It's a character pairing, right, of 4 characters that has sort of by this time become a stand-in for Confucian gender norms, right? And she hates this, right? She's talking about how this is not fair, how other countries don't have this same system that's so oppressive, and it angers her. She gives a speech about women in boxes, right, and how when a father gives the marriage chest to the husband, right, he basically puts the wife in the chest, or his daughter, and gives that to the husband. And so in fact, the women are being passed from their fathers to their husbands, right, and without sort of any agency. So these are very impactful speeches, very emotional speeches that get a lot of press as well, and help to make this movement for freedom and people's rights even more popular. Another figure who's inspired by Kishi Toshiko is Fukuda Hideko, who also is going to begin giving some speeches. She's a bit younger, so she will be more active later on. She's also involved in this Osaka incident. I'm not going to today's class go into that, but there is an effort, right, to force change to happen more quickly and to force the government to respect the desires of this movement for people's rights. So she also goes to prison for that as well. Later in her life, she will become a little bit more. She will go a little more into retreat, and she will become a writer, and she will become a socialist and a feminist leader in that respect. And so I think that I'm having you read from her diary. Well, it's her memoir for tomorrow. So that's all on Moodle. You can look at that. You can learn more about her. She's also very struck by the fact that even men who are in favor of women's rights and of a more democratic and liberal government, don't treat women very, very well in real life. So, food for thought. There's also a figure I would like to mention, a bit of a surprising figure, who comes to embody this new movement because she's not from the upper class, the aristocracy. And this is Kusuno Sekita, who is just a woman. She's a housewife of the upper sort of elite farming class, but she's a head of household because her husband has died, right? And so she has to do all the work of a head of household, right? She has to run the household, she has to pay the taxes, she has to register the land, she has to register with all the family with the nearest Buddhist temple. She has to do all that work, along with being a mother who has to take care of her children. So she gets wind of this sort of people's rights movement, right? And she's excited by it, and she writes a letter. And this is going to be, I think, too small for you to see, so I will. It'll be online. But basically, what she's saying here is that I'm a woman, but I'm also head of household, and I don't have any rights, right? I pay taxes, but I can't be part of any voting system. I have no impact on the government of my locality or my country. Like, however, I pay tax, although I have no right to vote. So she's been gypped. She's been slighted, and she's saying that. So this is her sort of a memorial, a complaint that she writes, and this is published in several papers, which I mentioned a few slides ago, and becomes also very popular, sort of a rallying cry for more popular political involvement. And in particular, she inspires a figure. Sorry. Who continues to move forward the cause of freedom and people's rights. This is Ueki Emori, who works alongside and is giving lectures alongside Fukuda Hideko and others, but he's also a writer, and so he's trying to, again, make this movement a national movement. He draws a lot from Herbert Spencer and John Locke and others to argue for the equality of the genders. Although, again, as you will see for tomorrow, Fukuda Hideko finds him to be a little bit of a hypocrite. But anyway, he helps to bring this figure of grandma popular rights, what I mentioned a second ago, on the national stage and fights for that. He creates a newspaper that's all about the movement, and this gets him put in jail, but it also becomes very popular. So all these things, these are all the different threads that we have: the intellectuals, and we have the We have the government before that that's also tied to Satsuma and Choshu and Tosa and Sakamoto Ryoma. We have the intellectuals, and then we also have a more popular thread here as well. So there is a lot of sort of agitation for more rights and more of a say in politics for the population. So the government is aware of this, right? The Satsuma Choshu and some Tosa samurai who are in charge of the government are partially, they're responding to this. So before it gets too crazy, they establish assemblies in each prefecture in 1879. But these were very, very sort of small, restricted assemblies. First of all, they were based on land income, so didn't have any of that, you couldn't vote. And then it was based upon you being a man, and it was based upon how much land you had, right? So in fact, only about 1% of the men in Japan over 25 could actually vote in these first prefectural assemblies. Government also, meanwhile, was worried about too much power for, at this point, what they called a stupid commoner population, right? They're not going to know what to do. They're going to make bad decisions. So they also passed some laws against the presses, criticizing the new government, and they also passed a law in 1880 against political assemblies that are not approved. So there's sort of a back and forth here, and this will continue and be embodied also, I think, in the Constitution. 1880, there's the new government is also aware that there's so much pressure for a national assembly of some sort, and they believe in this, I think, to some extent. They were co-revolutionaries with Sakamoto Ryoma, these figures. They announced they're going to have at some point soon an imperial diet, hopefully in a decade. And it does take them a full decade, but they eventually do establish an imperial diet. The imperial diet has two houses, right, based largely on the German model of a bicameral diet. The House of Peers is the aristocracy. So these are members of the court, right, who are tied to the emperor directly or indirectly, but tied to the court, and who have titles like barons and counts and dukes in Japanese. And then many of the former daimyo become members of the aristocracy. And then some people, the emperor and the new government, are able to give titles to. So there's a small aristocracy that they get to have houses in the house. They get to have seats in the House of Peers. The House of Commoners, on the other hand, or representatives, is actually the sort of the more democratic house, and it's chosen by election. The first election happened in 1890, and I was trying to recall. I had to look it up. Election was broader, right? If you were a male and you were 25 or older, and you paid 15 Japanese yen or more in national taxes, then that would make you eligible. But again, this is going to end up being about a population percentage of about 1%. So it's on a national scale, it's a bit more than at the local scale, but it still is a very small population for voting. And so, as you can see, the system of democracy has not actually progressed very far for many. The last thing I want to talk about is the Constitution, which kind of is explained in this image here, but I don't want to go into that in too much detail right now. I want to talk about how the Constitution comes to be crafted. It also takes quite a bit of thought and effort. The Meiji Constitution is really the fruit of the work of two figures, right? One is he's the director of, what's his title? Inoue Kawashi was an expert on law, professor of law, and he also was an expert on Western law, Prussian and Belgian constitution in particular. He'd been overseas. He'd seen the actual documents. He talked with legal scholars there, so he brought that back with him. He also had like another title. I think he also had a title, I can't remember what it was, of like a tutor of Confucian thought to the emperor. So he has very strong intellectual background in both Confucian thought as well as this new Western thought. So he is, many would say, sort of the most important drafter of the Constitution. But the figure who gets most credit for the Constitution is a Choshu samurai named Ito Hirobumi, who had been a student before of Yoshida Shoin, right, if you'll recall that name from a few classes ago. He is one of the top sort of 5 most influential men in this new government. He's the first prime minister of Japan, and he'll be prime minister again a couple times. So again, very important. He's on the Privy Council, which the slide before would show you, advises the emperor on what to do, more or less. And he also is, he's gone twice to Germany, and so he is drawing on this Prussian model for the Constitution. The new Constitution, that is, the emperor presents to the people of Japan in 1889 at a big ceremony. It does lay out this new government's structure, and I want us to take some time now and look at that. So, if you could just sort of pass these back. I'm not going to read the whole thing, we'll just read parts of it. Okay. All right. All right. These. All right. Get those passed around, please. So I want to first take a look at the section on the emperor. So Article 1 of this Constitution, let's see. So if you go down to, let's see, if you go to the second page, yeah, it's weird, it's backwards. Yeah, so if you turn over the first page on the back side, on page 746. Thank you, Tash. Do you all have one of these? Okay, great, thank you. So go to that page and look at the Article 1, please. Titled The Emperor. Okay, so have you had a chance to look at all the articles in Article 1? Look at it carefully. Okay, so this is about the emperor. Thinking about primary sources, right? So who is this primary source written for? The government? Yeah, the people, yeah. And tell me again your name? Jackson, right? So this is the document that everyone in Japan will hopefully know pretty well, right? This is the nation state is founded more or less when you have a constitution in the modern period, right? When you have a set of laws and also of ideals by which the country defines itself. So this is a document for the people of Japan. All right. If you have to summarize in a few words, right? What is the place of the emperor in the Japanese, in the new Meiji government? It took a while to get here, but they've made these statements. So, what is the place of the emperor in the Meiji government?
Head of the empire.
Head of the empire. So, what does that mean, Antonio?
In charge of the government.
Yeah. Yeah, he's in charge, right? He's the head in every way, right? So the empire is reigned over, right, by emperors, and by the emperor in particular. So what if the emperor and the diet are not in agreement. Who has the prerogative there? The emperor, right? The emperor has the prerogative, or at least in theory, that's the case. And the emperor is also in charge of the army and the navy. So why is that important? The emperor is head of the navy and the army. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Ross?
If the diet doesn't do what he says, like, he's in charge of the army and the navy, so.
Yeah, right. So even in Japan, right, itself, right, the emperor could, in theory, call the military to go do his bidding for them, right? Interesting thought, I would say. And why do they mention? Let's look at Article 1 first, and maybe also Article 3. So in Article 1, why is the emperor, why is the emperor's, the language here I think is very specific. So let me ask you this question. What is the point of Article 1? They could have just said the Empire of Japan is reigned over by the emperor. So why do they have the emperor, why do they phrase it, a line of emperors unbroken for ages eternal? Why is this phrasing used as the very first line of the first article of the Constitution? Ben. Yeah, right. So a big part of this is selling the people of Japan, the nation state of Japan, right, and selling them the idea that the emperor is the unifying symbol for the country, right, and that you said that he's important in part because he has this unbroken line of ancestors. Yeah. What else? I saw a few more hands up. Natalie.
Something else is the language of reigning over the empire of Japan. You have like a very specific bloodline that is separated, so they always have power over the common people, and that is now. So it's going to the third article that gives all the power to be sacred and inviolable.
Inviolable, yeah, right. So he's sacred, and he's also he has this bloodline, right? This bloodline will give them power. Other countries may have to vote someone into power, or they may have a king who's been deposed, and there's a democracy. This is actually making clear that Japan is not really fully a democracy, right? I've forgotten your name, but tell me your name again. I think you had your hand up. Yeah. What were you going to say? Martin.
Basically from the shogunate back to the emperor. So I think it's more of a wake-up call for people like, oh, the emperor is like really important and instead of like the shogunate.
Yeah. Very well put. So the emperor is important, and especially thinking about the Tokugawa Meiji transition, thinking about this new government that we have, it needs to be legitimate. It needs to have authority, and making the first article about the emperor and his supreme authority, right, and his supreme long-term eternal authority does that very well. So we'll keep going on the Constitution in the future, but I wanted you to have a look at that for today. This document, it does set forth the blueprint for Japan's government, but also how it will function as a government. So I think, yeah, Antonio, we're out of time. So the population hears about this in newspapers, and then some of the articles are printed in the paper. And every prefectural assembly has to have a copy of the Constitution, so they get to discuss it as well, and it gets sort of propagated that way. Yeah. Cash? Yeah, so that's a long story, but the emperor, in theory, can marry any person from the aristocracy, as long as he himself has still that blood. It carries on. So I think we have to go. We're out of time. So thank you guys. Hold on to those for maybe a future discussion. For tomorrow, be sure and read the text on Moodle called, I think it's called Half My Lifetime by Fukuda Hideko.